Well, we're coming down the home stretch, and I'm really glad to be done. But I'm actually excited to be done as well. This is the chapter we're going to deal with today. I got my paperclip in the right place, but I just thought I'd like to read to you. I have to put different glasses on here. Uh, from the back of this book, this publication of it way back in the day. What year was this edition published? I bought it secondhand, and somebody had to cross their name off before they shipped it out there. This is, I don't know, 1990, something like that. Not sure. Maybe older. But on the back, this is what some people have said. Now, you probably don't even know these guys, but you might know the name Griffith Thomas from back in the day. He said, one of the great books of the 19th century. That's my opinion, too. Somebody else said, this is without a doubt the preeminent work on the association of Christ with his disciples. Well, it's a good one. It might be the preeminent. I don't know. Unequaled in its field, somebody else. A great book full of suggestions and savor. It should be the companion of every minister. No, that was Charles Spurgeon. Isn't that interesting? I hope that you've stayed with this. I know that it needed to be reworked because of the vocabulary of it and so that you could read it faster. I decided to go through it and give you my reflection on it as we go, and that's why we're down here. When I took the various segments of a chapter, and so the chapter numbers don't line up from this book, but I took a segment. Sometimes there were 4 segments in a chapter, and I've individually changed them all to separate, shorter chapters. When we get the book published, and that will be, Lord willing, within a month, I'll have this thing banged together because of some helpful stuff with contemporary software, and I will put it in a format that you can buy it and have it in print. Having it in print is probably the best thing because the physical aspect of getting towards things, like this person before me had highlighted some things. They wouldn't highlight the things that I highlighted, but they've demonstrated that they're ingesting the material maybe and integrating it into their thinking. And I hope you will do that. And I hope that these broadcasts have helped you in regard to that. If you put this all together, I think you'll have a great training about how to deal with things as God wants you to deal with things. People say they want to be like Jesus. Politicians say they want to be like Jesus. Pastors say they want to be like Jesus. Everybody says, I want to be like Jesus. And they won't even study Jesus and what he did and what he said and how he approached individuals and people. And this book has been a really useful tool in regard to that. It's not the only tool. I may have some more tools coming up. I will have some more broadcasts on the subject from some more contemporary people and putting it together so that you can have some help as you seek to work with others. I think one of the great failings that we've had, and I've mentioned this many times before, is that we fail to understand how important the relationships are in the church. We have put an emphasis on teaching people how to do lectures. We call them sermons. I guess a sermon is just a lecture about add 10 decibels to it and some enthusiasm. And sermons are useful, but they're not what they ought to be. I know one consultant that I worked alongside of and worked with in a church, he used to say that the primary means of a pastor teaching is his sermons. And I don't necessarily dispute that, but because of his emphasis on sermons, my judgment on working with him was he was very weak on developing relationships, particularly an inner circle of people that he can work with. You want to be like Jesus? He chose a dozen people to work with. He especially worked with, we have indicators of 3 of them, and he focused in on one of them. And he spent 3 years, the perfect Son of God, working with the imperfect followers. and with a perfect curriculum, the perfect methodology. And we've got to go back to understanding that Jesus was far more interested in that smaller group than he was in that grand size group. Yes, he did work with groups, and the big groups, and people came to him from all around. And out of those, probably some other people filtered to get into the group of 70 and 120 when we get to the book of Acts, and some other disciples kind of in concentric circles, closer and closer to the Lord. And that's the way you got to be working. If you're going to be like Jesus, you're going to work with some people. Well, I have to give my time to my family. No, your family is one thing, but people beyond your family is something else. You recognize that there was no kind of family first evidence in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John about how people dealt with their families. When at one point, people, his family members, his mother and his brothers, and came to him, and they were outside and they couldn't get to the building. They said, "Hey, your family wants to talk to you." And Jesus says, "Who's my family?" And he recognized the highest value in family was the people that he was dealing with right then and there. And the others, he wasn't going to neglect them by any evidence that we have. But he didn't allow them to interrupt. Oh, well, family first. No, I don't know where we got that from. We certainly didn't get it from Jesus. And so we can understand that there is much about being like Jesus that we need to work on. Okay, so we're coming down to kind of the end of the book. We're getting down to those last final chapters, and we're getting down to the onboarding to the ministry that is to come for these disciples, this inner core, 11 who are left. Now we got two key events that happen after the resurrection in terms of teaching stuff. The one is recorded by John in chapter 21, and that's what we're going to look at today, just a little section of that we're going to focus on. And then we've got the one that we call the Great Commission, particularly Matthew 28. Probably this John 21 reclamation of these guys back into a focused work came before the Great Commission, as recorded most notably in Matthew 28. In Matthew 28, Matthew tells us that some doubted. And if these events that we're going to talk about that came before that were actually were before, there was a process that was going on with these individuals. You couldn't just, give them a test today and say, well, that's it. There was always more work to do, remedial work, helpful work, and Jesus worked with them. So we're going to dig deep into what's going on here. And these are the new under shepherds. These are the new guys. People got, with the church, we've got a new pastor coming, and he's going to solve all the problems. Like fun. He's not going to be perfect. Maybe he's different, maybe a little more successful in some ways than others, and maybe what the church needs. But the church goes on. People are coming and going in the life of every church. A church is not a static group of people. There are always people being added and always people that are moving away or even dying off. And it's very important that we understand that that's who we're dealing with, and that this will always be a moving target. And these new under shepherds needed to figure out how they were going to work in regard to that. So let's just think about where they're at here and going forward. First of all, in this passage in John 21, and we are going to just look at the kind of the background of Jesus saying, "If you love me, you got to feed my sheep, you dummy." You didn't quite say it that way, but you know what I mean. So we've got in John 21, 7 disciples going and fishing together. Where were the others? Don't know. But 7 of them are up in Galilee. These are the people who have a propensity or experience with fishing. They're named, all except for 2 of them. And it's quite fascinating to me that in John 21, John does not mention Andrew by name. He may have been one of the 7. There were 2 other disciples. He mentions Peter by name, but not Andrew. That it's just really kind of confusing a little bit, that nothing we can do about that, in the sense that we just don't know what all of it was. Now, Bruce, along with a lot of people, when he talks about this, has a take on what these guys were doing when they went fishing. I'm not satisfied in my soul that the idea that they were going AWOL, absent without leave, is the proper interpretation. It may be, and that's the one that Bruce takes, but I think there's more to it. I think there is a time to go fishing, metaphorically and maybe physically. There is a time to step back and take a look at where you're headed in life. We have the term sabbatical. I get a little frustrated with pastors who go on sabbatical and don't actually sabbat. Yeah, just got to goof off for 3 or 4 months or whatever it might be. Others take a formal course, maybe work on another degree. Not against that. But it seems to me that the personal work that you need to do with yourself and perhaps a few others, a mentor, and maybe even a focus time with some mentees, is what needs to happen. And who's to say? Peter says, I'm going fishing. And we say, well, look at that. That guy's just failing on his responsibilities. Maybe not. Maybe he's starting to show some leadership. Maybe. He's taken these other 6 guys with him in the boat. What we know is this is something that was familiar to at least most of them. They're at least from the fishing area up near Galilee. They're not down in Jerusalem where the crucifixion and the resurrection occurred. They're up there, and they're working on it in some way. Don't know if they're retreating, saying, let's go back to the old ways. There would be comfort in their familiar place. So whatever that familiarity is, I think is a useful thing, because it settles some of the jangled nerves and it lowers the stress hormones, the cortisol, and maybe the heightened dopamine in their brain. It lowers these things so that they can ponder a little better. And there are times when we need to ponder about our lives. Maybe they are just taking a rest after this really upsetting time frame of their life through the trial and crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Maybe there's this dream and desire to get back to simpler days. I'm not sold on that as the only understanding of what was going on. Maybe they had second thoughts. That's Bruce articulates this really well in his book. Maybe they were asking the question, is it really worth it to do this? Maybe they were saying, wow, if it was that bad then, it's going to be bad going forward. It's going to be difficult. Maybe they saw safety in being fishermen. Maybe they saw that being apostles was far, far bigger than they thought it was. I don't know what they were thinking. But I do know that when they got out there, they fished all night. I don't know why they're going fishing at night, but it's what fishermen did apparently. And they caught nothing all night. So they went out there to fish, and it wasn't working. It was dry. Obviously, deliberately superintended by God. Maybe it's like, well, that old life of going fishing, we had the times when the nets were full, and it was really wonderful, and I could smell the fish and the seawater. It's fresh water in the Sea of Galilee. I don't know. But this jarred them out of their situation. Jesus appears to them on the shore. Don't know how he got there. He's there. And we're going to get to this later. I think we missed something. A chapter in this book. I'm going to add a chapter, and I'll give you just a clue on it. This is I think, a great entry-level thing to help young people, particularly young men, consider the habits that they need in life, that they might emerge, not all of them, but they might emerge into leadership in the life of the church. This is the presenting problem that we started Breakthrough Pathways on, was that so many people say, I just don't have any leaders. You got to raise them up, and it'll take some time. So you better start with some teenagers. And I think that's what Jesus was dealing with here, the young guys, and they weren't perfect, and it took a while. It'll take a while for you, so don't think that you need somebody, oh, we got an annual meeting coming up and we got to elect deacons. Who am I going to nominate for deacons? You got to keep the hopper full, people. So that's what we're really trying to do here, this getting up here into this advanced level through these 50 some odd lessons now as to how Jesus was teaching. And I just read you, they did those who's who people, including Charles Spurgeon, thought that this was really good. And I think so too. So there, I'm in line with Spurgeon. Woohoo. So Jesus is there on the shore. Jesus is preparing for them. He starts a fire. He had to gather up the firewood, start the fire. I don't know how he started the fire. How does one start a fire? Do they rub sticks together? Don't know what they did to do that. Maybe snap some stones and create a spark. And I have no idea. Anyway, people had figured out how to start fires. So Jesus had figured out how to start a fire. And he's preparing breakfast for them. They fished all night, and he's preparing breakfast for them. That's the clue. That's what we missed. Jesus has a plan. He gives them a miraculous catch of fish. 153 of them, John records. I find that so fascinating that John and James and his buddies, they went out there and counted. After they got the fish back on shore, they counted the fish. When did they count the fish? Were they discussing what Jesus had said afterwards, and Jesus is still there with them? Because they bring the fish in and they have this breakfast and this encounter with Jesus, and then they're flipping fish from one pile to the other as they're counting them and discussing it. Maybe. See, getting together with small groups is one of the pieces of genius that humans need. And you can't do this on your own. You need other people. And if there's somebody who needs you, you need to be with that other person. One or two, I really am deeply convinced that 3 makes kind of a perfect small group for you to work with, so there's not too much pressure on anyone, and there's new information. And I think that can become terribly inbred, where you discuss the same old things over and over again. That's why I like the idea of rotating people in and out. I've got a formalized way of doing it, even a software to help you develop that with the 6 people who over a period of a year each meet with all the others. So on, I that's part of the breakthrough pathway system that we're building. And I think it's consistent with this idea of these guys marinating in this stuff, working on it together. We certainly expect that Jesus had already had a conversation with Peter in restoring him earlier. Paul refers to that. We don't have the exact information on that. But I think that when Jesus is speaking to Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes. And Jesus says, I got a job for you. Now he's saying it to Peter, but with all the other guys in the small group as well, who are going to be part of the mission going forward. We don't have a lot of historical records on them, but we do know that they were all part of it because they're there on the day of Pentecost, and it's a short time frame going forward from this event. But what Jesus says was applicable to Peter, probably as the primary representative of the group, but also to the others. It's really simple. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. This 3 times. And Peter's frustrated. He says, you know that I love you. No. Peter had demonstrated that he really did have this strong connection to Jesus. He had the events of the Lord's Supper, and then he failed, and then he came back, and he said, Jesus said, do you love me more than these? I think it's more than these is not defined. It could be the context of the nets, the boats, but I think it's the people. Do you love me more than these other guys do? And I don't think Peter was trying to say, yeah, I do, because he already knew that he'd messed up. His love was not that strong, but his commitment was that strong, because as soon as when they're out there in the water, you read this in John 21, Peter he gets all discombobulated and so excited. He puts his coat on, jumps in the water, dumb idea, and gets to shore about 100 yards off of the shore and gets there so he can get to be with Jesus. He has this strong commitment to Jesus, even though he's failed at it along the way. He's already been privately restored. He's eager. He has unveiled here a deeper commitment. So when we say at the beginning, I'm going fishing, and he's out there and he's trying to run away, Jonah-like run away, then why would he quickly jump in the water as soon as he sees Jesus and jump back again? I think that he just was pondering. That's my take on it when he was out there fishing with the boys. But Jesus doesn't say, well, I'll give you the chance if you really want to do it. Jesus is saying, no, I want you, this is a command, I want you to go feed my lambs, feed my sheep. I want you to take this love and turn it into action. I get really upset in my soul when somebody says, I love Jesus, but their lifestyle doesn't show it. And they say, well, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church. That's not possible. You can't be demonstrating love for Jesus and not having this concern to help with the church. Yes, the church is messy. There are always going to be difficulties in the life of the church, but you can't just quit on it. You got to get out there and do what you got to do to be a part of what God has called you to do if you're ever going to be what you really want to be. So Peter represented a perfect example of an imperfect man. Bruce says Peter loved the freedom. I'm not sure that there's evidence of that there was any sense of freedom. Otherwise, in the first place, when Jesus said, leave your nets and follow me, that bam, he just jumped right to it. But we see Peter moving from being a bit of a jerk. I don't think there's any other way to say it. An arrogant jerk. Maybe not terrible as most arrogant of jerks, but he's troubled. And some of the things he said, to the point that at one point Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, looking Peter in the eye. I think that's saying you're being a jerk. But he was a malleable jerk. And we see, pardon me, we see that over time, and really relatively short period of time in terms of years, Peter's evolving. We got an incident with him in the book of Acts where he's got this narrow focus that this is who the gospel belongs to. And he gets his vision supplied by God to say, no, you got to think bigger than that. This is a global message. He's growing. And by the time he gets to being older, and older is not younger than me, in his 50s likely, by the time he writes his books, and he writes these 2 letters, you see a different man, more thoughtful, deeper, someone who understood life and understood the character traits that needed to develop in his life, and add this to that, and think about this, and where he would call down curses on people if he had his choice early on. He says, love covers a multitude of sins. It still does. And so being that loving kind of person who reaches beyond is what Peter became in the end. Jesus said, follow me and I'll remake you into a fisherman. At the beginning, he says, follow me. Doesn't matter what the other guy does, don't worry about him. He says that in John 21. You follow me and feed my lambs. And we see that he did. What a great example of what you can do. You can be more. You can be more than you are. You might look at yourself and say, oh me, oh my, I'm so imperfect. Yeah, you are. We all know that. You know it better than others, but God knows it a whole lot better than you do. But you can still be useful and be out there and feed some other people. New believers, we're always looking for new people coming in. They're like sheep, and sheep are tedious to deal with at times. And it takes some time, and you got to spend some time and invest some time in them. And then the mature believers have to shepherd the others. Whether you get paid for it or not is an absolutely irrelevant question. If you're mature, you will become a shepherd and feed the lambs, whether it's formal or informal. You'll take some interest in some other people and do what you can do to move from being dependent on saying, feed me, Pastor. I'm not getting fed enough. Feed me, feed me, feed me. Oh, this is driving me crazy with people who do that. Turn around and take what you've got and give it to others. You don't have to be perfect. You're never going to be that way until you get home to glory. You don't have to know a lot, but you have to care a lot. I look back into the situation of my life when I was in a bit of a valley. I was doing some other things in ministry, but not serving in a local church. And a pastor friend of mine who didn't fully understand what I understood to be God's calling on my life. I met with him and his wife and my wife, and we went to their town, different town, and I worked for him as his associate at one point in time. He said to me, Gary, why don't you get back in the ministry? I had never left the ministry in my mind. I'd left the local church in terms of a paycheck, and I tried to explain it to him. I think he sort of understood it, but it was the passion in his heart that he saw that I had been useful in the church as working alongside of him and had something to offer. Yeah, probably a little too much of a bull in the china shop. I can see that looking back on it now. But it was his concern for me that mattered, and I know he shared that concern with other people. And you can do the same for other people. You can move from where you are to where you need to be to help other people, to feed other sheep. See, there's always three kinds of people. There's the sheep who actually follow. They're the good guys. That's not the majority of people in your church, in my view. There's the shepherds who lead, and that's really the minority. It should be a bigger number. It's all of our responsibility to demonstrate love, and love is got lots of practical demonstrations that are mentioned. You can get our book. Wendy and I wrote Bubble Up Church. It'll help you with the one another's of the New Testament, what we've got to do for responsibility to others. And you look at it all at once and it becomes a heavy load, but you look at it one piece at a time, you say, yeah, I could encourage somebody a little bit, because it says encourage one another and accept one another. Oh, yeah, well, I can demonstrate acceptance, even though, in my mind, I'm thinking, why is that person, whatever, dressed that way or behave that way? I can accept them where they are and demonstrate love to them. I can do this because I can be a little bit of a shepherd to help some other people. But then you got a lot of people in church, and I think this is typically the majority, and people say, our church is going to be, I got to work until I get our church more sanctified before we try and start another church or add another ministry or whatever. I'll get over it. You're not going to get them all sanctified. Some people are there to sit and soak, and they're going to turn sour. It's just the way it is. They might be refusing to serve, and they've always got their excuse saying, I did my bit, I'm too busy, etc., etc., etc. I'm not trained enough, and whatever. People who say, no, this is my private thing, and I need to grow myself. No, the way to grow yourself is you give to other people. These three types of people, those in the middle, you can move some of them, but not most of them. Those who are ready to follow, wonderful group of people. And you can see sometimes the older people are ready to follow, but they're often insecure and they need some encouragement from shepherding from the top, not just one shepherd, but all kinds of others around them to go fishing with the seven guys in the boat, as it were. Peter, we see him grow. We see him grow. He starts to show some humility, where he says to Jesus, I love you. It's like, and he's sorry about his mess up, but he's ready to move on and to do something good. And we see as we move into the book of Acts that that's exactly what he did. He was accepting the call to lead. He couldn't avoid the possibility forever. He was ready to become more of what God wanted him to be. And the strong people if you really think of yourself as strong, that's not how many books you read. That's how many people you help. It's how much love you have demonstrated to others in the name of Jesus. And the best way to show love to Jesus, to other people, is to get them engaged with a bigger group of people, get them engaged in a local church. There's nothing you can do better than to start by reaching out and fishing for people and saying, I'd like to invite you to my church, and let the conversation go where it goes. You don't have to convince people. Some are interested, most are not. But if you say it to enough people, some will be interested. You got to say less to more people. And then when somebody says, interesting, I'd never considered going to church, say, well, it's something to think about. You don't need to press them right at that moment. You can come back and make a note to yourself. You can make a physical note. You can do that on your phone. And give them something maybe to read or whatever. Invite them out for lunch afterwards. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. Again, I got a book on that too, if you want some help there. This is the number one thing that we are failing on. And 27% is of research of people who say, I don't have anybody to invite. Yes, you do. You may not have a strong relationship with somebody, but you can say, hey, just thought I should ask. The guy that I meet at the corner store when you drop by to buy your guilty pleasure of a Haagen-Dazs ice cream or something, he's just curious if this might be of something of interest to you. We've become acquaintances here, and I'd like to invite you to my church. You don't know what they're going to say, but don't assume that they're not going to come. Sometimes they'll come slowly, particularly from a history of another world religion, and you don't know what your church is like. And if they say, well, what's your church like? Don't tell them, just say, come and see. You can't describe it to them. It won't hurt them. What's the worst thing that can happen? If you come and invest an hour in your life, you watched a lot of bad movies, and you knew it was a bad movie in the first 10 minutes, but you're still at it 2 hours later, hoping the movie's going to get better. It's not going to get better. So why don't you come to church and give it a shot? Maybe it'll lift you up. Maybe it'll turn you in a little direction. Maybe it'll make you a little more curious. You never know until you try. So you give them the opportunity. And demonstrate your love for people by giving them the opportunity to come to Jesus. We saw in the New Testament that Peter became bold, got to get up in front of the Sanhedrin and talk. The people who were confused at the beginning, including the 7 guys in the boat, they got a lot wiser. People started to listen to them like others had listened to Jesus. You know, you're weak. I got it. So am I. So is everybody. Remember that you are but dust, and that you are weak, but he is strong. And that he can renew your capacity to make a big difference. Remember that God's love extends to you, and he forgives you as you repent. He doesn't just forgive if you don't repent. That's nonsense. Oh, well, God's just, he overlooks stuff. No, he doesn't. He's a judge. But you can be the demonstration of acceptance of somebody until they come to Jesus. Others need you to help them. For God's sake, for your own sake, make a difference to a handful of people, and you never know what God will do because of you. There's all kinds of possibility. Why is it that these guys all said, this is a great book, and so few have paid attention to it? Why is it that people say they want to be like Jesus, yet they've never even read the Gospels or studied a little bit about what was going on between Jesus as he was demonstrating the principles of developing character, giving them a little opportunities, seed opportunities to work with people, showing them by demonstration how to work with people, and ultimately commissioning them to reach the whole world. It took some time. It wasn't easy. It's never been easy. It's not going to get easy going forward. If this is for you a brand new year, well, it is, because the next year, if you live, I don't care if it's the middle of the year, the next year is an opportunity for you to be something more. I learned recently that something I thought about. If you every week just make a little change in your life that makes you 1% better, By the end of the year, because of compound interest, you're 67% better. And by the end of 10 years, you're 18,000% better. If you can just every week pick up one more thing that you're going to do, that you're going to stretch yourself to talk to a stranger in the lobby of your church, that you're going to reach out to a neighbor over the back fence and say, I know we've talked about this before, but I'm wondering if you've changed your thinking at all about that. And you can have a conversation with somebody and listen to their perspective. You don't need to try and force people into a new way of thinking, but you can demonstrate how you live, how you think, how you relate to others. And that can become very attractive to others. And some of them will, over time, come to the Lord. It won't be thousands in your lifetime. It may only be one or two. But when you see the multiplier effect of you adding 1%, just a little improvement every week throughout a year, you become 67% better by the end of that year. That's something to strive for. Now, I know some of the things that you think will make you better might not work out. So if you become 50% better at the end of the year, isn't that something better than being the same thing and recycling the same nonsense? Get on with it like Peter did. Accept responsibility to be all that God wants you to be. And the Lord will be glorified. And in the end of the day, that's what really matters, to bring glory to Him. You can be a part of that great endeavor. Catch you next time.